seen that video from.
In September of last year, Reformed YouTuber Redeemed Zoomer released a video called Every Roman Catholic Contradiction Explained. Many of the points are pretty easy to answer, and there is abundant material to refute Zoomer for those with basic research skills. For example, you can reference my abundant research on salvation and membership in the church across a number of different articles and videos. But there has been an issue that many people on our side of the internet have been scared to touch: the issue of ecumenical dialogue. The reasons for this are numerous, but it usually comes down to two facts. First, most people on YouTube don't really do a whole bunch of independent research into primary sources, and most of this information can only be found by said independent research into primary sources. Second, most people on YouTube are not really willing to defend the seemingly harsh statements from preconciliar popes against non-Catholics. They would rather critique them for these statements. Well, I like doing independent research into primary sources, and I like defending harsh statements against non-Catholics. So what I wanted to do here is to basically go through everything for an entire century before the Second Vatican Council, in order to show that the real history of the Catholic response to the ecumenical movement is completely different from the false history that Redeemed Zoomer gathered from a partial reading of the documents through the lens of watching Jay Dyer and Vatican Catholic YouTube videos. I want to give a summary before I begin. Rather than a complete ban on participation in the ecumenical movement, there were multiple permitted forms of participation. First, even without permission from the Holy See, Catholics and non-Catholics could gather and collaborate on issues related to a common defense of the natural law, or even of common religious principles in defense of the Christian religion. Second, with permission from the Holy See or one's local ordinary and extraordinary situations, one could have ecumenical meetings and become members of organizations where matters of faith or morals were discussed that did not seek some sort of super-confessional union where the Roman Catholic Church would become a part of such and such a federation. Third, while it was completely against divine law and prohibited under every circumstance to join organizations such as the Pan-Christians and branch theorists who sought to make the Roman Catholic Church a part of their new organization, it was never prohibited in principle for other forms of participation to be approved by the Holy See, such as in sending observers who would engage in the discussions. Fourth, in every circumstance, communicatio in sacris was prohibited, yet common prayers were permitted in certain cases, such as the common praying of prayers approved by the Catholic Church, for example, the Lord's Prayer. This issue will not be treated in full and would require an entire other video. Before we begin, I would like to remind you of my Patreon. An insane amount of work and independent study went into making this video. If you appreciate the work that I put into this video and all my other videos, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/militantomist or making a donation on my website at christianbwagner.com/donate. The year is 1892. The United States decided to put on one of the most ambitious affairs in human history, the World's Columbian Exposition, a fair held in celebration of the 400th anniversary of the founding of America by Christopher Columbus. This was a display of American exceptionalism held in Chicago, which was visited by 27 million people. Yet this fair would spark a little-known controversy surrounding the orthodoxy of one of the most beloved and well-known American clerics of the era, Cardinal James Gibbons. During this World Fair, the organizers wanted to host a massive gathering of all the religions of the world, Christian and non-Christian alike, called the World Parliament of Religions. This type of gathering fit the spirit of the age, which was latitudinarian. The ideology held that none of the religious groups participating held to the entire truth, and that the plurality and diversity of religions was a good that ought not to be disturbed. Alongside the other religions invited, the Catholic Church was also invited to send representatives. This was hotly debated within the American Church. Some argued that it was not necessarily evil to present Catholic doctrine at such gatherings, as had been done at similar gatherings before, sometimes even organized by Catholics. Others argued that the specific purpose of the gathering was to present religions in the light of the latitudinarian spirit, promoting indifferentism. Hence, even if the representatives would give presentations of Catholic truth, it would be done in the context of indifferentist spirit, and would necessarily give scandal to the faithful and non-Catholics alike. Cardinal Gibbons eventually decided that such a world-famous event must have representation from the Church, and he decided to be the personal representative of the Catholic Church. Even more than this, he decided to personally open up the Parliament by reciting the Lord's Prayer. This event was disastrous for the American Church. To have a cardinal of the church who was the most prominent Catholic in America give such a prayer at an event that was fundamentally based on indifferentist principles gave credence to the indifferentist spirit that was already tempting too many American Catholics at the time. One of the opponents of the Parliament, Bishop Bernard John McQuaid, said of the Parliament that, quote, "Of late years, a spirit of liberalism is springing up in our body, that if not checked in time, will bring disaster on the Church. Many a time, Catholic laymen have remarked that the Catholic Church they once knew seems to be passing away. So greatly shocked are they at what they see passing around them." End quote. As a side note, Bishop McQuaid was awesome, and basically the leader of the anti-liberal faction in the United States during the time. He was asked one time whether he would bury the hatchet with a liberal member of the hierarchy, and he responded yes in his head. It took 2 years for Rome to step in and give her judgment on this whole affair. In September of 1895, Pope Leo XIII sent a letter to the Apostolic Delegate of the United States, Archbishop Francis Satolli. In this letter, Pope Leo condemned the participation of Cardinal Gibbons in the whole affair. He wrote, quote, "We know that from time to time there are held in the United States of America assemblies to which both Catholics and those who dissent from the Catholic Church come promiscuously to discuss together religion and morals. Although these common gatherings have been tolerated hitherto in prudent silence, it would seem more advisable for Catholics to have their meetings by themselves. Nevertheless, in order that the benefit of these assemblies may not be limited to Catholics, they may be conducted in such wise that the opportunity of listening to them will be available to all, including those who are separated from the Catholic Church. It gives us pleasure at the same time to express our commendation of the Institute of the Paulist Fathers. They have wisely adopted the plan of addressing our dissenting brethren openly, both to explain Catholic teachings and to refute objections brought against them. If each of the bishops would promote in his diocese the practice of these fathers and the frequent attendance at sermons, it will be most gratifying and acceptable to us, for we trust that it will result in no little profit toward the salvation of souls." End quote. It is this little-known letter of Pope Leo XIII that would form the foundation for the canonical and pastoral legislation surrounding the limits of Catholic participation in ecumenical gatherings. This highly publicized incident between Leo XIII and Cardinal Gibbons set the precedent for the obligations of Catholics towards such gatherings in the modern world. Yet we must be careful not to overestimate the representative value of the event for all ecumenical gatherings. Both before and after the Gibbons incident, Catholics were permitted to attend such gatherings in limited circumstances. But what are those circumstances? To begin, let's look at the central law of the Church on ecumenical gatherings from the 1917 Code of Canon Law. Canon 1325 states, quote, "Let Catholics beware lest they have debates or conferences, especially public ones, with non-Catholics, without having come to the Holy See, or if the case is urgent, to the local ordinary." End quote. Here we see two activities restricted in law, debates and conferences. I provided a long exposition of the scholastic doctors on the issue of debates with heretics, including notes on the continual validity of the law, which does not appear in the 1983 Code of Canon Law. I would suggest that if you want to know more about the acceptability of debates with heretics, check out my Substack article on this issue and subscribe to my Substack for more articles like this. Anyways, the one that is important here is the issue of conferences. Conferences refer to those religious gatherings of Catholics and non-Catholics. Obviously, gatherings that are secular in nature have always been permitted by the Church, and this does not fall under any sort of special law in the history of the Church. These religious gatherings referred to were meetings predicated upon bringing about the unity of the Church. Here we see that these conferences are not completely banned and excluded in all cases. Rather, they are permitted in certain cases, but these cases are to be permitted at the discretion of the one giving the law, the Holy See. Or in certain circumstances, even the local ordinary is able to permit these conferences. But what the law does not explain is what are the objective standards upon which the lawgiver will or will not permit these gatherings. As we saw in the case of Leo XIII and Cardinal Gibbons, we have two distinct comments. First, it is not permitted to attend these gatherings where one will scandalize others by incidentally implying that they are indifferentists. It is important to remember that the presentations given at the conference did not have any doctrinal errors. They stated the doctrine of the Church and its necessity plain enough. The problem was that the entire conference was predicated on the idea that religious indifferentism is true. hence why Cardinal Gibbons ought to have denied the invitation. Second, Leo XIII provides an example of appropriate conferences with non-Catholics. That is, the Paulist fathers who, quote, addressed our dissenting brethren openly, both to explain Catholic teachings and to refute objections brought against them, end quote. This method has non-Catholics invited to spectate at these gatherings, but not to speak at these gatherings so as not to spread their errors. Yet, as we will see when looking at the commentary of the Church on this canon, this is not the only acceptable solution. First, there were certain ecumenists called pan-Christians, whose intention was to gather all those who call themselves Christian together into a single religious federation, a new church where they could ignore all of their differences. Clearly, such conferences fell under the same errors condemned by Pope Leo XIII. Thus, there were multiple decrees of the Holy Office against participating in their mission. In 1927, the Holy Office declared that Catholics are not allowed to, quote, belong to or favor conventions, meetings, conferences, or associations of non-Catholics, which have for their purpose to unite all those who call themselves Christian in one religious federation, end quote. The reason for this is clear. The Church is a supernatural society that has been made necessary by God for salvation. One of the notes that God has given to this society is the note of unity. If we were to pretend that we could join this group that forms a new church by a federation or council or congress, the Catholic Church being a part of it, then we deny these two facts. The Holy Office in this declaration referred back to a similar declaration that it gave in July of 1919, which affirmed the continuing validity of two letters from Blessed Pius IX, forbidding membership in similar organizations in England, who attempted the same thing during the time of the Oxford movement among Anglicans who, deluded by branch theory, felt that there needed to be some sort of blending of the Oriental, Roman, and Anglicans into a single body without the conversion of the Orientals and Anglicans to the Catholic faith. Hence, on September 16, 1864, a letter was sent by the Holy Office ordering Catholics to not collaborate with the society since, quote, it has resulted from a view put forth by it in express terms that three Christian communions, the Roman Catholic, the Schismatic Greek, and the Anglican, those separated and divided one from another, have yet an equal claim to the title of Catholic, end quote. The Holy Office judged that, quote, the principle upon which it rests is one that overthrows the divine constitution of the Church, end quote. Beside an ecclesiological error, they were also stained by indifferentism, in that they affirmed that, quote, several points of doctrine in which they differ, each may follow undisturbed the opinions of his own religious profession, end quote, and, quote, that the active dissensions in which these Christian communions exist are short of any breach of the faith, inasmuch as their faith continues one and the same, end quote. Beside this letter from September 16, 1864, which was addressed to Catholics, there was an additional one addressed to Anglicans, given on November 8, 1865, which is a spectacular example of firmness and charity and truth. Both of these are admirably explained by Cardinal Manning in his 1866 pastoral letter titled, quote, The Reunion of Christendom. Yet, as mentioned above, the occasion for the comments made were the efforts made by the pan-Christians. After the various interventions made in the early decades of the 20th century, an encyclical was finally written on this problem by Pope Leo XI. An encyclical was finally written on this problem by Pope Pius XI. Here he gives a thorough exposition and refutation of the idea that unity as a note has been lost by the Church, and that it will be regained through some amalgamation that can only be achieved through indifferentism in things of faith, which is a, quote, most grave error by which the foundations of the Catholic faith are completely destroyed, end quote. A main error, which was already mentioned by Blessed Pius IX against the Anglicans, was that the note of unity was a mere ideal, prayed for by Christ, and was not realized, in fact, as a note of the Catholic Church. Quote, they are of the opinion that the unity of faith and government, which is a note of the one true Church of Christ, has hardly up to the present time existed, and does not today exist. They consider that this unity may indeed be desired, and that it may even one day be attained through the instrumentality of wills directed to the common end, but that meanwhile it can only be regarded as a mere ideal, end quote. Rather than affirming that the Church is a supernatural society with a unity of government, quote, they understand a visible Church as nothing else than a federation, composed of various communities of Christians, even though they adhere to different doctrines, which may even be incompatible one with another." End quote. From this, it is quite clear that for the same reason that Catholics could not participate at the World Fair, or with the Anglicans, also applied to the case of the Pan-Christians. The entire project was predicated on a false goal, whether it was a visible church that was a federation with no doctrinal unity, or it was a union of the three branches, or of some admission of the insufficiency of every religion. Hence, Pius XI gave the judgment that, quote, "This being so, it is clear that the Apostolic See cannot on any terms take part in their assemblies, nor is it any way lawful for Catholics either to support or to work for such enterprises. For if they do so, they will be giving countenance to a false Christianity, quite alien to the one Church of Christ." End quote. These same issues arose again and again throughout the early 20th century. In 1948, the Holy Office chastised a number of Catholics for attending these conferences without previous permissions from Rome, and exhorted them to remember their obligations in this regard. Quote, "In various places against the prescriptions of the sacred canons, without previous permission of the Holy See, mixed gatherings of non-Catholics with Catholics have been held, in which matters of faith have been discussed. All are reminded that it is forbidden to take part in these gatherings without the aforementioned permission. There is still more reason for observing these rulings when there is a question of what are called ecumenical gatherings, in which Catholics may under no circumstances take part without the previous consent of the Holy See." End quote. Father Franz Huth, moral theology advisor to Venerable Pius XII and consultor of the Holy Office, gave a series of annotations that year on this intervention from the Holy Office, which explains the teaching in more detail. Father Huth is in a unique place to understand the document in that he was the draft writer for it. First, he clarifies the scope of the law. It is often forgotten that the Canon 1325 is generally concerned with matters of faith and not matters whatsoever. Hence, while a conference on a matter of faith with other religions falls under the prescripts of the canon and requires the approval of the Holy See, a conference on other matters would not fall under the same approval, such as ethical, social, or political conferences. Huth states, quote, "The warning deals with mixed religious meetings of non-Catholics with Catholics, that is, with meetings in which matters of faith are discussed. Therefore, the warning does not include mixed meetings in which other subjects are treated, for example, scientific matters not touching religion, or purely social, economic, or similar topics. The warning, therefore, in general, does not go beyond what is laid down by canon law." End quote. He goes on to explain what these mixed meetings on matters of faith would have looked like during his day. Ordinarily, there would be lectures given by Catholics and non-Catholics in an attempt to explain both the content and grounds for their doctrine. Then discussions would happen on each side, and reports would be written and presented as to explain the agreements and disagreements present. In some cases, there are even acts of mixed worship, sometimes including the common celebration and reception of the Eucharist. Sometimes these meetings were very private, with only a few competent individuals attending. At other times, it was promiscuously open to all people. Sometimes these meetings were held with the approval of the competent authorities, and sometimes it was held against the approval of the competent authorities. Beside all this, the end purposed for these meetings are diverse as well. Sometimes these meetings have as their purpose the construction of a new pan-Christian church, that is, an amalgamation of the participating churches. At other times, it is to discover differences or to discuss reuniting the other side with the Catholic Church. With this great degree of diversity of matter, form, and end, it is clear that the permissibility and impermissibility of each of these gatherings cannot be either absolutely approved or absolutely disapproved, contrary to those who think that there were no ecumenical gatherings approved by the Church before Vatican II. Hence, Father Huth states, quote, "If what is contained in this warning is considered more particularly, the first thing noted is the fact that mixed meetings of non-Catholics with Catholics have been held, a fact which is notorious. What is reproved is not that they have been held at all, but that they have been held contrary to the prescriptions of the sacred canons and without the prior permission of the Holy See. The prescription of the sacred canons lies precisely in this, that the permission of the Holy See must be sought." End quote. A famous example of such a conference that did receive approval is the Milanese Conversations, which included Anglicans and Roman Catholics. In fact, the main disputant on the Roman Catholic side was one of the most eminent theologians and philosophers of the era, Cardinal Mercier. This conference was held between 1921 and 1927 and led to many agreements between Catholics and Anglicans, although it became clear by their fifth conference that such a meeting would not bear the fruit of union. Of particular interest is one of the agreements reached that sounds strikingly modern. Remember a few months ago when certain individuals crashed out for Pope Leo, saying that our union with other bodies, quote, should not involve absorption or domination? Well, one of the agreements was that, quote, union, not absorption. Such would seem to be the formula of reconciliation, end quote. This is a striking example of an ecumenical meeting that was good, fruitful, and approved by the Holy See. The reason why it was approved by the Holy See was because it was vastly different from the groups started by the pan-Christians and the branch theorists. These groups and meetings did not have as their end some destruction of the Roman Catholic Church and making it the part of some whole. Rather, they had dialogue as their end in order to bring about a union of others into the fold of the Catholic Church under the authority of the Roman Pontiff. Beside this, there is another interesting note given by Father Huth that is often not clearly taken into account when considering the degree of participation in such ecumenical gatherings. While it is intrinsically wrong to enter into such groups as the branch theorists or pan-Christians as a member, since it would imply something false by the very act, there are other ways in which the Holy See could and did allow for participation. He states, quote, the Catholic Church is prevented by divine law from participating in such ecumenical conferences if participation would mean being present as one among many equal churches. For the true Church of Christ cannot, either explicitly or implicitly, or by factual behavior, concede that there are several true churches of Christ, which could and should unite in some higher unity. This Catholic truth, however, does not prevent some Catholics, with the consent of the Holy See, from attending such ecumenical conferences as private observers, from setting forth Catholic doctrine, and from answering questions and doubts posed by non-Catholics about Catholic teaching, end quote. This practice of sending observers had already been common for decades, even in the gatherings of pan-Christians, whose meetings were predicated on abhorrent errors. As noted by Marotta in the paper The Holy See and the Question of Sending Observers to the World Conferences of the International Ecumenical Movement, such happened constantly with the approval of the Holy See in the early 20th century. In 1940, Cardinal Savaggiani, the Secretary of the Holy Office, explained how this role would look like. Quote, this Supreme Congregation is not averse to your allowing such participation to some fathers of the Society of Jesus within the limits and under the conditions indicated below, namely 1, to submit to the Preparatory Commission an exposition of Catholic doctrine on the subject to be dealt with at the Congress, so that it may be published, together with the other writings, in the volume intended for the Congress participants. The author must, however, include a declaration that he does not belong to the association. 2, to attend the meetings of the Preparatory Commission as observers, and to speak only in the following cases. A, at the request of the Commission to clarify a point which has remained unclear in the written treatment. B, at the request of the Commission to illustrate a point of doctrine connected with the main argument. C, to correct the erroneous attribution to the Catholic Church of a doctrine which is not its own. End quote. Hence, from its founding in 1948, the Catholic Church has desired to send observers to meetings of the World Council of Churches. Yet, unlike the Eastern Orthodox Church, Assyrian Church of the East, and Oriental Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church has never, will never, and could never become a full member of this council. At the founding of the World Council of Churches, Father Trump, one of the most famous ecclesiologists of the era and close theological advisor of Venerable Pius XII, and most of the Curia thought that Venerable Pius XII should send a warm letter personally and some observers to the meeting. Venerable Pius XII, while not desiring to personally send a letter to the council, did desire to send observers to participate in the 1948 founding, and did desire for another member of the hierarchy to send a letter. It is recorded, quote, concerning the papal letter, the Holy Father does not wish, with a document of his own, to enhance the value of the conference, nor to confer upon it the prestige that a papal act would give it, by giving it greater attention in this world. As for the observers, let them be sent, with the precautions taken for the Birmingham meeting. But they should not be more than 5 or 6. The Holy Father wants Father Congar to be excluded, end quote. Yet the entire process was ruined by Father Congar when he informed the Holy See that the WCC was already working with individual Catholic priests who would attend as members without the approval of the Church. This was obviously unacceptable, and in a large part spooked the Holy See. From this point, the negotiations between the Holy See and the WCC soured. The entire thing ended up going up in flames, after they could not come to an agreement on who to send. The ironic thing about this whole ordeal is that this was the result of Father Congar either lying or not understanding the entire situation. The WCC understood that the Holy See would never be a member of the WCC. It understood that this was against Catholic dogma and wished to respect this. But they also had a vested interest in having observers from Rome in order to add some prestige to the meeting. So the WCC reached out to Congar, who was overly friendly with the ecumenical movement, in order to ask him who the hierarchy might actually accept. This was strategic, so that when the WCC proposed some names to the Holy See, the names they proposed would be pleasing to Rome. It would obviously be idiotic for the WCC to propose a bunch of modernists to the Holy See, since this would spook Rome from even sending observers in the first place. But Father Congar took this letter as some sort of secret plan to get member priests without asking Rome. Yet the same mistake would not be repeated in the future. A few years later, in 1952, there was another conference of the WCC in Lund. Father Trump personally ensured that these negotiations would not lead to failure. He closely followed the 1948 meeting and saw that the absence of Catholic observers was disastrous and led to an anti-Catholic tone on the whole event. Hence, Father Trump and a handful of other observers, most of them who were converts, were sent by the Holy See to Lund. Many Catholics who attack the contemporary practice of the Church will often fail to make these three crucial aforementioned distinctions that were clearly latent in the pre-conciliar Church teaching and practice. First is this gathering of Catholics and non-Catholics on matters of faith, or some other matter. If some other matter, then it can be permissible for Catholics to join. Further, as we will see below concerning the 1948 decree of the Holy Office, if it is on a matter of faith or morals, is it an issue that is common between the members? If so, it is permitted. Second, does this gathering imply falsehoods about the unity and uniqueness of the Catholic Church by its very nature, such as in the gatherings of the pan-Christians or branch theorists? If it does not, Catholics were always allowed and positively encouraged to do so with permission of the Holy See, as we saw in the example of Cardinal Mercier. Third, if it is some gathering that does imply falsehood, what is the manner of participation? Are we simply praying for their success? We have always done this, and the popes have positively encouraged this, as we will see especially in the letters of the bishops of the Netherlands. Are we simply participating as observers? Are we participating as full members and parts of their false federation? The former can be permitted, the latter can never be permitted due to the implications. It would imply that we view ourselves as part of some supraconfessional church, while also part of the Catholic Church. During the same year, there was a pastoral letter of the bishops of the Netherlands on the same topic, as I mentioned above. The reason for this was the fact that the aforementioned first meeting of the WCC was in Amsterdam, and the Dutch bishops were intimately involved in the negotiation around sending observers. While technically not promulgated by the Holy See, it's commonly cited by Catholic authors as an authoritative expression of Catholic teaching on the issue, and was read and approved by the Holy See before publication. Here we see another lucid expression of the traditional Catholic doctrine, which, while deploring the lack of unity among Christians, still refuses to participate in meetings that would imply doctrines contrary to the unity of faith and divine constitution of the Church. Here, the bishops emphasize the joy they have in the fact that there are many who seek unity, and state that they will be praying for their efforts that they may find the true unity of Christ in the Catholic Church. They call the desire of the ecumenists, quote, deep and sincere, reflecting a similar attitude to Cardinal Manning, who decades earlier went so far as to say that these different movements within Protestantism were graces given by God to push them towards unity with the Catholic Church, an attitude that was also inculcated by Benedict XV's aforementioned attitude towards the Episcopalians. In a turn that may sound shocking to those with an overly simplistic understanding of preconciliar views on those outside the Church, the bishops write, quote, we earnestly invite you all, priests and faithful people, to pray fervently. Pray during these days for those who are taking part in the Congress, and for the countless other non-Catholic Christians who eagerly look for unity, who really adhere to Christ and live in His love. who, although separated from the flock of Christ, yet look to the church, sometimes without fully realizing it, as the one door of salvation. Pray first for those who are in a position of leadership among non-Catholic Christians. They have a great deal of personal responsibility for the simple faithful depending on their guidance, having often not sufficient talents to arrive at a true understanding of the matter through their own efforts." End quote. This acknowledgement of the presence of inculpable heretics and schismatics was common in this era. As two examples from Venerable Pius XII, he wrote, quote, "We have learned how vehement is the desire for religious unity that exists among many of the sons of your nation, that is, Germany. Who could feel this desire more vividly than the Vicar of Christ himself? The Church embraces those separated from her in faith with unfeigned charity and with fervent prayers, that they may return to their mother, from whom very many, whom God alone can count, are separated without personal fault." End quote. And, quote, "We lovingly invite each and every one of them, that is, non-Catholics, to yield freely to the inner impulses of divine grace, and to strive to free themselves from a state in which they cannot be secure of their eternal salvation. For although by a certain unconscious desire and wish they are ordered toward the mystical body of the Redeemer, they nevertheless lack so many and great heavenly gifts and helps, which can be enjoyed only in the Catholic Church." End quote. Father Trump is in a unique place to understand the scope and purpose of this document, as intimately involved in the entire WCC affair mentioned above, and officially sent by the Church to negotiate the sending of observers. In fact, he drafted the original version of the letter with the Utrecht Curia and gave the official English translation, which was the official translation given to the delegates at the WCC. After giving a history of the background of the time, Father Trump distinguishes between two kinds of participation, as Huth did above. Quote, "In this earlier part, it is explained in clear words why the Catholic Church cannot take place in the Congress. This does not need explanation. Only this should be noted. It is a question of participation properly so called, by which the Catholic Church would send official delegates in order with equal right to discuss religious matters together with the delegates of the various groups. Strictly speaking, a certain participation in a broader sense would not be repugnant, namely that the Church might send official representation for a better knowledge of the case and to enlighten separated brethren concerning Catholic doctrine. This, however, certainly will not easily happen." End quote. This same mindset is quite clear in 1949, when the Holy Office sent out yet another clarification on this matter on the ecumenical movement. It states that, quote, "The Catholic Church, although she does not take place in congresses and other conventions called ecumenical, yet has never ceased, as is clear from many pontifical documents, nor will she cease in the future, to follow with the most intense interest and to promote by earnest prayers to God all effort toward the attainment of what is so dear to the heart of Christ our Lord, namely that all who believe in him may be made perfect in one." End quote. As reflected in Cardinal Manning and by the Netherlands bishops, the instruction states that this desire for the return to unity is something arising from the grace of the Spirit. Quote, "Now in many parts of the world, as a result of various external events and changes of views on the part of people, but especially in consequence of the common prayers of the faithful through the grace of the Holy Spirit, there has grown constantly in the minds of many people separated from the Catholic Church the desire for a return to unity on the part of all who believe in the Lord Christ." End quote. The reason for this was stated by one of the most prominent cardinals of the era, Cardinal Domenico Tardini, who told the delegates of the WCC when they stated that the Holy See was against their movement that, quote, "I told him, one, that the Holy See cannot but view with satisfaction any initiative that has charitable purposes, is inspired by feelings of unity, etc. Two, that the Holy See and Catholics have their own organizations and act through them. Three, that this is an action that does not hinder others, so vast is the field of charity. Four, that Catholics also help non-Catholics in a spirit of Christian charity." End quote. This instruction to bishops gives a thorough account of the possible dangers of the ecumenical movement, much of which is quite relevant today. For example, it instructs bishops to be careful of those who downplay matters of Catholic doctrine when speaking to non-Catholics simply because they are not matters of faith. Quote, "They must restrain that dangerous manner of speaking, which generates false opinions and fallacious hopes incapable of realization. For example, to the effect that the teachings of the encyclicals of the Roman pontiffs should not be given too much importance, seeing that they are not matters of faith." End quote. Yet this is tempered by the statements concerning the perfection of any graces received as a non-Catholic by their admission into the Catholic Church. Quote, "It should be made clear to them that in returning to the Church, they will lose nothing of that good which by the grace of God has hitherto been implanted in them, but that it will rather be supplemented and completed by their return." End quote. Most importantly, though, this document provides the most precise account of the occasions and conditions where attendance at such meetings will be appropriate. For many are confused by the traditional doctrine of the Church on attendance at ecumenical meetings. Since canon law required permission from the Holy See in order to attend meetings with non-Catholics, they have concluded that it is never permissible to attend meetings with non-Catholics. This is clearly a logical error. Rather, Catholics were condemned for attending such meetings either due to attending meetings that are intrinsically impermissible to attend, or attending meetings without the correct procedure in the law. We have already treated this in some detail above. The document states, quote, "On the one hand, these meetings afford the desired opportunity to spread among non-Catholics the knowledge of Catholic doctrine, which is generally not sufficiently known to them. Yet, on the other hand, they easily involve no slight danger of indifferentism for Catholics. In cases where there seems to be some hope of good results, the ordinary shall see that the thing is properly managed, designating for these meetings priests who are as well qualified as possible to explain and defend Catholic doctrine properly and appropriately." End quote. Yet it provides a warning for when participation in these meetings is imprudent, even if not against divine law. As an aside, I think this is where we can put many of the ecumenical gatherings that take place today in which the Church sends observers. Quote, "Where there is no apparent hope of good results, or where the affair involves special dangers on other grounds, the faithful are to be prudently kept away from the meetings, and the meetings themselves are soon to be ended or gradually suppressed." End quote. Yet, most importantly, this instruction of the Holy Office actually interprets the decree of Venerable Pius XII from 1948 mentioned above on the WCC. As we saw from Hurth and Tromp, the prescriptions of the Holy See do not and never have given an absolute ban on ecumenical meetings, but only on certain types of meetings and certain types of participation. Quote, "Mixed congresses are not absolutely forbidden, but they are not to be held without the previous permission of the competent ecclesiastical authority. Neither does the said warning apply to these mixed meetings of Catholics and non-Catholics, in which the discussions does not turn upon faith and morals, but upon ways and means of defending the fundamental principles of the natural law or of the Christian religion against the enemies of God who are now leagued together, or where the question is how to restore social order or other topics of that nature." End quote. Here we see an expanded explanation from the Holy See on something that we mentioned above. Frequently, the authors mention working with non-Catholics on political or social issues, but we here see that this extends beyond merely secular issues and also to issues of the religious sphere. We're able to have mixed meetings on common issues of the Catholic religion with non-Catholics. Further, there is another helpful clarification that requires a history of its own. Frequently, documents of this sort will ban the practice of what is called communicatio in sacris, yet the instruction clarifies that some common prayers do not qualify as communicatio in sacris. It gives the example of opening and closing the conference in the common praying of the Lord's Prayer. Quote, "Although in all these meetings and conferences, any communicatio in sacris must be avoided, yet the recitation in common of the Lord's Prayer, or of some prayer approved by the Catholic Church, is not forbidden for opening or closing the said meetings." End quote. The question of communicatio in sacris, or in divinis, would take an entire video to treat, so I will skip over it for now. After this point, there is a letter that is commonly quoted by many against Vatican II and the ecumenical movement, written by Cardinal Stritch. Yet, it is to be remembered that this letter was written in 1954, 2 years after observers were already sent to the WCC in Lund. When this letter speaks about participation in these conferences, it clearly doesn't mean to reject sending observers to such conferences, lest he condemn Venerable Pius XII and some of the most prominent theologians, canonists, and clerics of his day. Rather, participation is to be understood in the sense of membership, which has always been condemned. As a reminder, the Catholic Church to this day only sends observers to the WCC and is not a member of the WCC. The occasion for making this video is the Octave for Christian Unity, which is held between January 18th and 25th. and has been officially sanctioned by every pope going back to St. Pius X, extended as a celebration of the Universal Church by Pope Benedict XV. This was in response in a large part to requests sent by Episcopalians who organized the World Conference of Christian Churches. While he stated that the Catholic Church could not be a member of such a conference due to its indifferentist presuppositions, he did send a gracious reply and instituted the octave to pray for the true Christian unity in a brief dated the 25th of February 1960. Father Wiersmuth, one of the most eminent canonists of the 20th century, notes the friendly history behind the institution of this octave. Quote, "In the year 1910, the Plenary Assembly of the American Episcopal Church, in order to promote the unity of all Christians, proposed a Congress of the whole world, to which it invited many heretical sects from the very beginning. Above all, however, the cooperation of the Catholic Church was sought. On the 2nd of November, 1914, the Secretary of the World Conference sent a most courteous letter to Cardinal Gasperi, asking that the Supreme Pontiff might deign to pray to God for the happy success of its efforts. On the 18th of December, 1914, His Eminence, the Cardinal Secretary of State, replied courteously, 'His Holiness expresses the greatest wishes that everything may come about according to their hopes, and he implores Christ Jesus in the most earnest terms, so much the more since, by Christ's own proclaiming and commanding voice, he knows that he himself, to whom all men have been entrusted to be fed, is the principle and cause of the unity of the Church.' Pope Benedict XV ordered that prayers for the unity of the Church be recited from the 18th to the 25th of January. The World Conference itself decreed that on those same days of the year 1918, prayers for the unity of the Church should be offered. In May 1919, certain selected men of that group were received by the Supreme Pontiff with great benevolence. His Holiness stated that while he could not participate, he did not disapprove the Congress itself of men who are not in communion with the Apostolic See." End quote. During these 8 days, we are meant to pray that all men may be united in the Holy Catholic Church. During this octave, I'll be giving a series of talks for the St. Nicholas Tablish Network, known as TAVNet, on related topics about Christian unity. I would encourage everyone to pray for the success of TAVNet, who seek to bring about the unity of all men in the conversion of Muslims to the Catholic faith. To learn more about them, visit their website, www.tavlishnetwork.org, or their YouTube channel called TAVNet, both linked in the description below. If you're interested in watching these talks, I will be uploading them for my patrons and YouTube members, so if you are not a patron or YouTube member yet, I would encourage that you become one at the links below. Now let's get back to the video. At this point, we have went over many of the official ecclesiastical documents with commentary from prominent clerics who in many cases authored the documents promulgated. Yet during this era, quite a few theologians and canonists also commented on these sources. I wanted to give you just one helpful example, Kalendner's dissertation, Discussions with Non-Catholics. His work has two parts. The first on disputations with non-Catholics, which I covered in my Substack article mentioned above, and the second on conferences with non-Catholics, which is the subject of this video. He begins by clarifying the type of conferences that he intends to treat here. Quote, "The recognition and acknowledgement of differences between the members of the various religious groups," end quote, so that despite these differences they may, quote, "strive for one end by means of common or parallel action," end quote. There are a number of different motivating causes for these types of groups engaging in this type of action. Everything from, quote, "the fear of a revival of religious persecutions," end quote, to, quote, "the realization that there can be no social or political unity without religious unity, the theory that a definite step will have been taken towards religious unity if there's unity based on the natural law," end quote, to, quote, "the erroneous conviction that no one religion exists by divine right to the exclusion of all others," end quote. These motive causes are listed in abundance by one of the greatest anti-modernists in the United States from that era, Father Francis J. Connell. I will here be treating of Father Connell's doctrine as well, which is luminous. His two most famous works on this topic are his 1941 article in the American Ecclesiastical Review titled Catholics in Interfaith Groups, and his 1966 Catechism on Ecumenism. In order to judge the lawfulness of participation in particular groups, the Church uses two principles to judge. These are listed by Father Connell. Quote, "The first is Christ's law of fraternal charity. By virtue of this, we are obliged to interest ourselves in the spiritual welfare of those outside the Church, particularly by striving zealously but prudently for their conversion. They are the other sheep whom our divine Savior yearns to have in his fold. We must labor towards the fulfillment of his desire. We may not be indifferent to the spiritual needs of those who differ from us in religious belief. We may not be content with waiting for them to come to us for information about our faith. We must take the initiative and eagerly seek opportunities of bringing to their notice clear and cogent arguments for the divine origin and the divine authorization of Catholicism. The second principle governing our association with non-Catholics is the fundamental doctrine that Catholicism is the only true religion, and that its acceptance is obligatory by divine law on all mankind. From the same principle, it follows necessarily that Catholics may not give any positive approval or assistance to the propagation of a non-Catholic religion. Beyond doubt, every such religion contains some element of truth and of goodness. Yet the religion as such, taken in its entirety, is something false, something opposed to God's will. As far as the divine law is concerned, it has no right to exist. One who dies as a member of a non-Catholic denomination may indeed be saved, provided his separation from the Catholic Church was not gravely culpable. But even in this case, his salvation is due not to his affiliation with a non-Catholic sect as such, but to his personal dispositions, particularly faith and charity, and to his implicit desire of membership in the Catholic Church." End quote. What follows most importantly from the second point is that we can neither state nor approve the tenets of indifferentism. While these principles are luminous in themselves, in their application they can cause a great degree of difficulty. A Catholic may zealously hate heresy and strive to fulfill the second principle, yet find himself empty of charity towards that man. Further, a Catholic may strive to love his non-Catholic neighbor, to respect and honor him, yet find himself slipping into indifferentism. Hence, any participation in disputation or common meetings with non-Catholics must be treated with the greatest degree of care. According to Kelleher, there are two important questions that the theologian must ask himself when faced with this problem. First, has the Church absolutely forbid Catholics from participating in some or all of these conferences? Second, if not, is there some sort of additional legislation about participating in these conferences? Must a Catholic use his own reason to determine whether such conduct is in accordance with the natural law and divine revelation, or must he follow the determination of his superior on this point? While these questions may seem similar, they're actually quite distinct. If the Church absolutely forbids something, it is judging that such an act is intrinsically evil and can only be tolerated. This is a question of the determinations of the law of God. Yet the second question is one of procedure. Is a Catholic allowed to particularize these principles himself in his concrete circumstances? If not, who does he need to talk to? The second point, of course, is mutable. This is a procedural question of positive law that changes in this or that era of the Church. The first question is moral and binding to Catholics of all ages. After the introduction, he begins to treat the history of legislation on this point. The first affair he treats is the affair with the branch theorists mentioned above. His conclusion on this is, quote, "In condemning societies which are founded for the purpose of uniting all Christians in one federation, without the complete submission of one and all to the Catholic Church in matters of faith and morals, the Sacred Congregation is merely putting into explicit terms a clear precept of the divine, natural, and positive law." Briefly, the letters prohibit participation in two types of conferences: those which aim at a union of the churches with due allowance for particular differences, that is, on the basis of a lowest common denominator, and those which strive to promote tolerance by imbuing the participants with a respect for the diverse religions of others. It is obvious that these two prohibitions are still in effect. End quote. The second affair he treats is the affair with Cardinal Gibbons mentioned above. He states, quote, "This letter, in the light of the history of the World Parliament of Religions, appears to be directed against the type of meeting between Catholics and non-Catholics in which a real and immediate danger of indifferentism is present. Such a meeting differs specifically from conferences which aim at union on the basis of the lowest common denominator, or strive directly to imbue their participants with a respect for the diverse religions of others." End quote. In both these affairs, we have virtually contained the entire extent of the opposition of the Church to certain conferences. First, the Church states that it is intrinsically evil to join the first type of group as a member, such as the branch theorists, or as we saw earlier, the pan-Christians, insofar as this necessarily involved the profession of falsehood. Second, the Church does not oppose simple discussions with other religions, whether public or private. Yet, in the case where indifferentism may be spread to the participants or other Catholics, then it ought to be forbidden. Hence, the second would be evil per accidens, and whether and how this would be a sin would be determined by a number of different moral factors. As he goes on to write, quote, discussions on religion and morality between Catholics and non-Catholics are not forbidden in themselves. These discussions are not always intrinsically evil, but are sometimes to be judged as licit or illicit according to their extrinsic circumstances. Where the circumstances are such that a real and immediate danger of indifferentism is present, because of the fact that the different religions as such seem to be placed on an equality of Catholic participation, is necessarily forbidden. End quote. The example of these affairs answer the first question: what does the law of God teach? It teaches that 1. Membership in groups that would make the Catholic Church a part of some higher union are intrinsically evil, and 2. Participation in other discussions can be good or evil depending on the circumstances. Hence, as to the second question, it can only be in relation to the second point. How are we to prudently consider these circumstances? Does the Church require recourse to its authority, or are Catholics allowed to decide for themselves according to the 1917 Code? We already know the answer to this question. It is quite clear in the Code itself. It was required that Catholics have recourse to Rome unless it was an emergency, then recourse could be made to their ordinary. Well, that's all that I have for you. I hope that you found this helpful, and as always, God bless.